This is the Ramana Maharshi 40 Verses on Reality Satsang, a time for listening, reflection, and self-inquiry. Know yourself and be always free and at peace. Welcome. I'm Richard Clarke, hosting this satsang. I'm a seeker like you, sharing what we love. I've been blessed with years of deep teaching and practice that I bring to this satsang. This week's reading is from 40 Verses on Reality, verse 26. If the ego is, everything else is also. If the ego is not, nothing else is. Indeed, the ego is all. Therefore, the inquiry into what this ego is the only way of giving up everything. Does the ego even exist? It seems to, so long as we hold it to be real. This seeming reality of the ego comes from you, your being, your consciousness, the self are always real. What appears as a real ego gets its reality from you, not the other way around. The ego borrows its reality from you. You get no reality from the ego. The ego is made of assumptions and imagination. You are made of pure consciousness. Inquire into the ego, and you'll see that the source of the ego is your own existence consciousness. Without this existence consciousness, would the ego even exist? Is the pot other than the clay? Is your seeming ego made of anything else but existence consciousness? Existence consciousness lights up the ego so you can know it. Without this light, the ego is not. It is inert. It does not exist. Along with the idea of the separate ego comes everything else, the world, other people, and your idea of a higher power. If the ego is false, what about the sense of reality it gives to everything that depends on the ego? Is that sense of reality actually true, or is it also false? Finding out that the ego is false, you find out that everything that depends on it is also false. That's why Ramana says that the ego and everything else rise and fall together. Ramana tells us that if we want to give up the world, to renounce our worldly life for a more spiritual life, what we need to do is to renounce the ego. Nothing else is required. Since our idea of ourself as an individual and our idea of a separate world rise and fall together, to give up everything, all you need to give up is only one thing, a thing that really doesn't even exist, the idea that you are an ego, a separate entity. Now, here are some ways you can inquire and make this your experience. Instead of inquiring, who am I? Inquire, what am I? Or what is the nature of my existence? Is it anything physical, sensory, mental, or are you the same during the changes of any of these? What is real is what remains the same always. What within yourself is real? What does not change? Dismiss everything that comes and goes as not you. You are always the knower, not the known. You are what is always there. How can you be something that comes and goes? Do you come and go? What is your experience? Inquire, who am I? Now, on to our videos for the week. First is Swami Sarvapriyananda with a talk differentiating ego from the mind and pure awareness.
But let me ask you, do you experience the I? This is the crucial question. Do you experience your ego if you sit quietly and do you feel I? Do you feel that? All of us, when we look into the mind, do we feel the ego? Yeah, we can say I. With confidence, we can say, yes, I. I am sitting. Do I feel that? Yep. I am listening. Yes. So the ego is something that is experienced. If it is experienced, it is the seen. And you are the seer of the ego. Do you see where I'm going with this? The ego is the seen, and you are the seer of the ego. Otherwise, it wouldn't be experienced. If it is experienced, it's an object just like this. Even the ego, even the I is an object. I don't mean this I mean the vertical I. Even that is an object. You are not the ego. You are not the ego. The ego shines in your light. We get identified with the ego and we think we are the ego, and the rest of it flows immediately. The ego is identified with the mind, and the ego is identified with the body, and then we think we are the body and mind. This is how the mechanism works. And the whole purpose of Vedanta is to slice this connection between you and the ego. The ego can continue working. The mind will continue working. Memories, everything, body and mind will be perfect, continue working. And yet you will know that I use the body and mind. I am shining in the body and mind, but I am not the body and mind. So the whole strategy of Vedanta is to slice the connection, cut the connection, the apparent connection between you, the witness self, and the ego. Look again at the first line of Shankaracharya's beautiful hymn. I am not the mind, I am not the intellect, I am not the memory, I am not the ego. Manobuddhi ahankara chittani naham. I am not the ego. Do you see how apparently contradictory it is? When you say I am not the ego, you know what you're saying? You're saying I am not I. The ego is the I. It says I am not the mind, I am not the intellect, I am not the memory, I am not the ego. I am not I. How could that be true? It's true because mind, memory, intellect, ego, they are all objects, they are all experienced. If they are experienced, the simple direct fact, I experience them. Hence, I cannot be those things. They are things. Just like this thing, just like this thing.
And now we will listen to Ādyaśakti, also speaking of verse 26.
Arunachala Shiva Namaste. Welcome to another episode of Uladur Narpadu. Today we're going to talk about the right view of the Jnani. Normally people think that we are in the world, but actually the Jnani sees very clearly that the world is in us. So the whole world is a dream. And as soon as one looks into, well, where does it come from? How does it arise? What is the seed? The whole thing unravels. It just evaporates. It disappears. And what's left is only consciousness and joy. Sat Chit Ananda. I know this is hard to take, huh? Because it contradicts so many fixed beliefs that we have. Yet, if you go into it as a meditation, if you experience it for yourself, you'll find that it's true. But people are very afraid to look into the ego. Huh? They're very afraid. Instead they want to do years and years and years of sadhana. And we are all afraid that if we dismantle the ego, everything will fall apart. And it will. That's the thing, it will. But then we'll be in an ocean of delight. Swimming in an ocean of unlimited consciousness and bliss. Try to understand. So, how do we approach this ego? Well, if we try to attack it directly and say, no, you don't exist, of course that just makes it stronger. Huh? So instead we attack indirectly by looking into how the ego arises. Where does it arise? How does it come into being? As in, we talked several times now about the Mula Pariyaya, the root sequence or root structure of the mind, and observing that in oneself. Not just talking about it like a philosophical argument, but actually going inside and watching it as a fresh impression comes in through the senses, how we overlay it with this sense of mine. I'm looking out the window, I'm seeing the tree. This is my window. This is my tree. Oh, it's not? But we imagine it so. We think it so. My window, my tree, my clouds, my sky, my world. It goes to that ridiculous extreme. And it is so. Because as soon as that we designate something as mine, we have reinforced the idea of I. I exist as a separate individual, identified with this body and this mind. And then we go on to build all kinds of stories. A whole soap opera based on that. When we discover the truth that all this time we have been serving this imaginary God of I, the ego. Because along with the ego comes space, time, matter, energy, motion, work, all the properties of physics, and then, of course, the human world with names and forms and different grades of persons, who is on top, who is on the bottom, whatever caste system we subscribe to, whether it's by birth or economics or some social structure. And then it goes on. And there's always some drama, some conflict that keeps us engaged and keeps us in our role, whatever role we have chosen. Now, one way to look at these things is that it's all karma. It's all coming from our previous birth activities. And another way to look at it is that it's just a choice. The being is always free. But we choose a certain lifestyle, even a certain family to take birth in, based on our own memories of what we did in the previous lives. It's not that there's some angel up there with a book recording everything and determining what the karma will be. No, we ourselves determine what the karma will be. Because we alone remember what we did. There's no need for external bookkeeping agency. What a ridiculous idea. Or an Akashic Records. The Akashic Records is in your own mind. Try to understand our power. See, right now, most of you are living in a reality where you have a very limited, fixed range of power and options and choice. And so what do? You look at life from this viewpoint. And then you go through so much sadhana and self-analysis and different kinds of struggles and so on to try to break out of it and attain realization. But who put you in that situation in the first place? You did. So from the point of view of a realized being, it's just ridiculous. It's laughable. It's ludicrous. Because we ourselves put ourselves in this situation, although we're actually free at all times. Why? Because we are trying to preserve the myth of the ego, the myth of the individual self. But there is no individual self. It's like the bubble of foam in the surf at the beach saying, I'm going to remain a bubble of foam forever. I don't care what happens. Even if another wave breaks and smashes me to nothing and I merge back into the ocean, I'm going to come out again as another one, another bubble. So, and then we have all these bubbles fighting each other. It's just ridiculous when you see it from the height of self-realization. It's a comedy, it's a farce. Because it's all not true. The whole world, the material world, is built on a lie. That lie is the individual existence. There is no individual. There is only God. There is only Brahman. There is only pure consciousness, non-dual existence. But we invent duality, and then we customize it to meet the needs of our story. So really what we're committed to is our story. And to have our story, to have our little soap opera of being an individual, we're willing to sacrifice everything, including our happiness, our well-being, and so on, just so we can be right. I don't think that's a good deal. So how do we get out of it? Well, yeah, we can play the game of doing sadhana and having a guru and going through the whole thing. And usually that's what's required. But in the end, we simply change our point of view. From being a body stuck in this world and being an ego stuck in this body to being free and just watching the whole thing as a play, as a comedy show. Because it is. It's a bunch of free beings who have chained themselves into this bondage in the material world. And it's all self-created. So it's really, really a hoot. So look at it this way. If you want to be free from your suffering, you have to be free from your ego. Then, like, who suffers? There isn't anybody to suffer. Objectless, pure, non-dual awareness certainly doesn't suffer. So who are you going to call, you know? You are it. You decide. Do you want to suffer? Do you want to be free? You want to be a tiny, limited ego in a world of lies, false promises, Maya? Or do you want to be a free spirit, a completely unbounded consciousness in a world of bliss? It's up to you. Om Tat Sat. Nothing but the truth here, folks. Om Hari Om.
And now we'll listen to my teacher, Nome, in a Satsang discourse, Egoless Being.
Existence is naturally egoless. And what is truly your existence is always so. The nature of which never changes. It is absolute. By the term ego is meant the assumption, an entirely false assumption, of individuality, some particularization of existence, or separation from this absolute existence. Sri Bhagavan said that the egoless state is the real state, the only real state that there is. Individuality, or the state of egotism, is an illusion and not real at all. Freedom from such illusion is known as liberation, or abidance in the self as the self. The individual is not, but you exist. And the nature of your existence, yourself, is entirely that existence, the self, or Brahman. And it is never otherwise. To imagine otherwise is merely ignorance, which too is not apart from this absolute existence, though there is no ignorance inherent in this absolute existence. For how could that which is of the nature of infinite consciousness or supreme knowledge contain ignorance? Or again, how could it be ignorant of itself? If one inquires, who is ignorant? Ignorance ceases. If one inquires, for whom is this illusion? The illusion ceases. The interior knowledge of the self, being's own knowledge of itself, transcendent of sensation and thought, is true knowledge, truly spiritual knowledge. Words and thoughts used to express this knowledge should not be regarded as the knowledge itself. The knowledge itself is of a non-objective character. It is not an it. Rather, in self-knowledge, in which you know yourself, you yourself are the knowledge. From the position or perspective of an individualized I, embodied and otherwise misidentified, how this can be so is most mysterious. Yet in your eyeless true nature, your existence as it is, which is absolute and one without a second, what is being indicated is self-evident. If there is the assumption of being an individual, where is the proof of it? That you exist is the fact. That you are a supposed individual, well, it is just a supposition. The body is not proof of individuality. After all, whose body is it? That is, the body supposedly belongs to an individual, meaning the individual is distinct from the body. What is the individual? What is your own sense of I, minus the misidentification with the body? Similarly, what is the nature of existence without misidentification with the senses? The herd of thoughts that seem to roam about is not proof of individuality or the ego. the thoughts seem to belong to someone. One says, my thoughts. The I of that my must be different than the thoughts. What remains of the sense of I if misidentification with any thought ceases? The further inward you proceed in this inquiry, the less there is to mark off the supposed individual. The more the sense of individuality vanishes, or may be said to merge with Brahman. The closer the look at the jiva, the more he turns out to be Shiva, and not a jiva at all. What in ignorance is mistaken to be a jiva or individual being is in truth only Brahman and not anything other. Illusion, delusion, ignorance of any kind, bondage, suffering, the samsara, birth, death, etc. All these are for the assumed individual and never for the reality of the self. Abandon that false assumption of being an individualized existence, and what you truly are, your real being, remains as it naturally is, as it always is. And in this is found complete peace and happiness, freedom from illusion, freedom from bondage, etc. Whatever appears as a problem or an obstacle or a bondage is for someone. Without that someone, what problem could there be? If your heart's desire is the supreme spiritual knowledge, inquire within yourself and know your existence as it is. Again, you cannot be known as an object. The self is never a known or unknown object. This is transcendent knowledge, self-knowledge, in which the self that knows, the self that is known, and the nature of the knowledge itself are all one and the same thing. If you yearn for liberation from all of the imagined bondage, know yourself. If you yearn to devote yourself to God, know yourself. If you yearn to realize the significance of Brahman, know yourself. And if you understand that self-knowledge is the key to all of this, well then certainly know yourself. Inquire. Inquire, tracing out your own sense of existence, and find its non-individualized, infinite, eternal nature. Existence is...
Now we're going to take a few minutes to meditate, to inquire. Breathe in and out, long, slow breaths. Feel the breath as it comes in, then as it goes out. And notice that you exist. You exist, and you know that you exist. And investigate within yourself. What am I? What is the nature of my existence? What within you does not change? What is always? Who am I? All right. Now let's close with a short chant. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Om. Peace, peace, peace. Thank you for letting me share this teaching with you. This series on Ramana's 40 verses on reality will continue in the following weeks. If this satsang was of interest to you, I have more, a free book site, a YouTube site, and my blog. The URLs will be on screen next. Namaste.